Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for stopping by once again. I've actually filmed this particular video twice already, and it just went on and on and on, and I just couldn't bear to put it up and so forth. So I'm going to deal with it a little bit differently and really more abruptly. I was trying to go through a whole laundry list of things, silly things that have been raised, and try to deal with them. It isn't worth my time. So I'm just going to pull them all together. We have a problem with some websites, some blogs or whatever, people who spread rumors or stories about Panama that are either not true at all or are based on inaccurate information or are very partial or so forth. They'll tell you that visa requirements are under serious review. They will change and it will be negative for you. Oh, really? Is that so? If that's the case, we'll all be talking about it. You keep in mind that when you hear in the press or somebody's talking about such and such a person in the government said such and such a thing about visas or work permits in particular, that they're actually not talking about you. They just don't. Europeans, North Americans, even Asians, I mean, it's just not the focus. The focus of most of that discussion are the people coming in from other Latin American nations. Right at the moment, lots of Colombians, of course. We've always had them. They're our cousins next door. We just celebrated this weekend the independence from Colombia, or separation from Colombia. Venezuela, of course. We have quite a few here, tens of thousands who came. These are who they mean when they're talking about expats. Most of the time, they're not talking about North Americans and Europeans. Right? So you have to try to keep this in order and know that if there's any dramatic changes to be made, everyone's going to know about them. And you'll be seeing it in legal law firms here. There are websites all over the place, and you'll be hearing it here and any number of other places, and especially if they're at least bit controversial. And then another is, this one came recently, 1/3 of Americans have gone home. That is utter nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I have worse words I can use, but this is a family channel. That is nonsense because no one keeps track of this stuff. The only hard statistics that we have are those from the Social Security Administration for people who actually receive their Social Security checks in Panama, which are a clear indication that they live here. And if they should move back, they will take the money with them. And so the trend, it's not the number of them so much, because some haven't even asked for their Social Security yet because they don't have to until they're 70, and so on. There's all sorts of things going on, or they're like me and they have it put into the bank account up in the U.S. The number is not the important thing, it's the trend. It represents older Americans, who are the group that most frequently come to this website, and it's a clear indication of the direction and whether or not the trend is moving up or moving down. And about a decade or so ago, and after the great financial crisis, which was such a disaster up in the north, people started saying Americans are going home, they're not coming anymore, the numbers are falling. So that was when I first went out and did the research, which nobody else seems to ever have the time to do, to get at these statistics, because they are hard numbers. And I could demonstrate, and did back then, that the trend was definitely up for Americans at that age, of retirement age, living in Panama and receiving checks. It was very clear. And since then, I've done it every year and keep it up to date, and I send it out to people. It's in my report that's at the website, the Retirement Wave website now, in the reports section. I'll put it down in the description below. Please read it if you have concerns like this. We see for the first time, the stats go back to 2002. For the first time in 2018, we had a decline, a small decline, as you will see very rapidly if you haven't seen it. It's been a very steep rise over the prior years. Now, I discussed there a couple of different reasons why this may have occurred, one of which is that fewer are coming. But that's yet to be seen. There are other things going on too, and that is a lot of people are renting instead of buying, and the result is they don't have their Social Security sent down yet because they don't really know where they're going to end up in the long term, and so on and so on. That's it. Otherwise, anybody who tells you that the number of Americans here are going up, going down, going left, going right, whatever, is full of it, because we don't keep that number. We don't keep track. You don't sign in and sign out when you come to the country or you leave, and you don't declare what you are when you're here. There are a number of different things that can be looked at, numbers and tax returns and said, and so forth and what have you. A lot of it's been done. A lot of studies gone into it, and they haven't really found a way to come up with a really accurate estimate of even how many Americans there are here. But one thing we do know is that when the stats that we have indicate no, a third of Americans, nothing like that has occurred. But that's, I don't know, where do they say? Maybe they have a source somewhere. You know, a source indeed. I think it's stuff like blackouts, and brownouts. I'm getting some of this when electricity goes out. If this can come from expats right up here who their particular neighborhood doesn't get electricity, they have problems with it. Suddenly it becomes everybody in the nation, when it's not. It's really much more localized. And it may only be a brief period. Or it might be 2 or 3 days, which is horrible, et cetera, and so forth, but it is not common in the country as a whole. And these are sometimes the complaints that come down from the U.S., people are very upset, concerned, somehow we're not, what are we doing about this? How are we taking care of this? Aren't we competent enough to keep the electricity going? Folks, California, if it were a nation, would be the 5th largest economy in the world. It certainly has a lot of money and it's a lot of programs and what have you. And that state seems to be permanently on fire. And it turns out that the PG&E, the electric company, is responsible for a lot of this, and that there are billions of dollars of losses as a result of fires caused by the electric grid. You're looking at us? You have to realize how silly that can sound. But in any event, these things are annoying, and sometimes the water stops at some location and they have to change the pipes from one thing or another. We have these things. This is a growing country, and sometimes it's just running to catch up with itself, but it gets things done. And so this sort of stuff, when it's made into a big scandal, it's silly. It's just ridiculous. I've been asked about, aren't we concerned that the people in our tough neighborhood, as the gentleman put it, he mentioned Venezuela, Colombia, and Nicaragua, that the people there might bring some sort of social unrest to this country, does not understand Panama at all, clearly, and that's all right. I don't blame any of you. You're just repeating things you've heard elsewhere. So be it. But no, that is not even remotely a problem here. No one to begin with is going to attack us. That isn't even a matter of discussion. But more critical, you're talking about social unrest. The Venezuelans under Hugo Chavez, their embassy here became a center for organizing people in Panama, trying to convince them to rise up there and to take the Chavez approach. They were very blatant about it, very active, out speaking to groups and whatever. It didn't work, but more to the point is that it got really annoying, and they were finally called in by the president, the ambassador was, and said, look, you're an ambassador, start acting like one or go home. We don't want any more of this. You have no business getting involved in our politics. I mean, it made no impact at all. Right? None. Now, with all the money he had at that time and all this enthusiasm and the fact that the embassies were completely under his control, his total impact in Panama was next to zero. And so nobody else comes anywhere close to that. So no, we're not going to worry about that. Nobody does. Again, these are the sorts of things that if they were issues, we'd all be talking about them. Now, so what's going on? And that's why I was having problems. I kept talking about individual criticisms that had been brought up. And I finally decided, no, I've got to get the basic thing across. And in 15 years, it's been very obvious, I think, not for every group, but for many of them. And that basically it's because they're here to have advertisers, they're here to sell newsletter subscriptions or pamphlets like The Truth About Panama or something like that, and to make their money. Now, in 2004, 2008, I didn't too early 2009, but certainly into 2008, a 5-year period basically. The first 5 of the 15 I've spent here, these sites sold something. And what it was in those days is that Americans, they're talking specifically about Americans now, they're the ones who come with this. to me. Some Europeans do, but there's still a smaller number, but it's the Americans who are frequently hearing this stuff. And they would come to me and during that particular period, very excited. Home values had risen and risen and risen. The bubble, as we all know it was now, was rising and inflating every day. And people were getting more money, retired people were getting more money for the sale of their homes than they had dreamed possible when they made their original retirement plans. And they were delighted. Meanwhile, housing down here was less expensive, and it was only beginning to rise in value, and it was certainly far less expensive than the inflated values in the U.S., so they could come down here and buy a nice home better than they had anticipated that they would be able to afford in a tropical country for retirement. Now, what the sites did is they joined right in. Now, this is how they manipulate. They're looking for the money, okay? So they aren't telling you the results of analysis. They're telling you what you want to hear, what they think you want to hear, and they test for that. And they figure out what it is you want to hear, and then they'll tell you that. And so they came up with hope on steroids. It was, this was paradise, an incredibly cheap place to live, and oh my gosh, the property values went up every year. And I got so sick of people coming down in that period from the U.S. with using the verb flip constantly. They came to flip properties. They were left with the impression, they got the impression, certainly not from me, that Panama was just like every other country, or like the United States, and they could just, we had a bubble too, and oh my, and all this, which was not true. Our mortgages here were as challenging to get as you'd find, and certainly not what was going on in the U.S. The whole result was that bubble burst up there, but there was no bubble to burst down here. So we came through that period very well. But while it was underway, these websites live in Panama like a king for $500 a day. That's what one of them said. Eventually, they finally raised it to $1,000 a day, but not so many years ago, we had one group saying you could live such a comfortable and easygoing retired life here for $20 a day. That works out to about $600 a month. That's bullshit. Okay? Sorry, but that's the way it is. It would just really, really aggravate me. Now, that one hung on doing that for quite a long time, but they were all doing it to some extent, especially in the beginning. And so they really got people excited. And these were people who had never lived overseas before, and they were listening to people from their nation, speaking their language, and had been doing it for years. They were authorities, and they were telling them all this. And I, meanwhile, was just getting retirement wave going, and as it is today back then. I mean, there was no money involved, so I was just slowly gathering in people who were subscribers. I had a newsletter that came out more frequently back then, but no YouTube at that stage. I started talking to them, and I began to realize, wow, they're paying way too much money for that property. They're way too excited. And no, you don't flip properties. The market here is dealt with very differently than it is in the U.S. Yet they were so excited that raining on their parade, as the saying goes, suggesting that maybe they were completely off on this one and that it was dangerous, only got them very angry, actually. At the very least, they were very depressed and upset and unhappy talking to me. And I just stepped back from it and said, well, good luck to them. You never know. And I'm not one for predicting the future. So I did. I most certainly did. But I had this, I knew that eventually this was going to have a bad ending, because they really didn't know what they were doing. They really didn't. And they were getting all this pressure. Now it's changed. What I used to call the paradise pixies, who used to say, "Oh, Panama is paradise, you'll love it here." That crowd has quieted down in recent years. There's been a new approach, and they are no longer selling hope; they're selling fear. Fear, because to their thinking, the people coming down now are worried. Many of them have never lived overseas. They come out of a society that right now is under a great deal of stress and a lot of division and what have you. And there's a lot of concern about fake news, and there's all sorts of this, that, and what have you. We all know We see it. It's sad, but it's the way that it is. And they're frightened, and there's something terrible is going to happen here, or they're going to be wild-eyed Latin American criminals or one thing or another. and I understand it. They used to be full of hope, and now they're full of fear. And so they play on that. Because why are you going to come back to the website? They got to keep coming to that website if the advertisers are going to be happy, guys. It's that simple. And usually it takes more than 1 or 2 visits to get you to actually send money to buy something. And what's drawing you in? Fear. You're fearful that maybe you will come and something awful will happen. It's not made any easier by the fact that so many people do this. This is, again, has always been true, but it's particularly true now, is that friends and family back home say, oh, that's dangerous. It's a very dangerous place to go. Guns and violence. None of this is true in Panama. But it's their image of Latin America in general, and it is true. In many Latin American nations, we obviously still have a lot of problems, but not here. We are really a very unusual nation in many different ways, and this is certainly one of the most important ones. And I've mentioned over, we're stable, we're secure, and we are growing. Even when we are growing poorly, as we consider it now, we're still leaders. But that is not how people feel. So they're so frightened, and I understand. You know, if it's the first time you've ever done this, if you're surrounded by people telling you you're jumping off a cliff or something, I can understand that. But what I dislike intensely is that these people don't care whether you ever come or not. They just care about grabbing you, getting your attention, and getting your visitations to their sites and their sales. They're in business, in other words. Well, and you're in business and you've got money to make, you say what you need to do that. I know that's the way the system operates. And I'm not complaining about that. What I'm complaining about, though, is the sheer inaccuracies and some of the nonsense that is handed up is simply not true. And they never provide any real solid evidence of it. They just say it, and then people repeat it. And repeat it to each other. It goes back and forth and so on, and it gets very tiring. So I don't intend to come on frequently to answer. They're always coming up with something new. We're now going through a period that's going to go on for some months where we're discussing the rewriting of the Constitution here, and there's a lot of strong feelings. I've already seen some stuff come out on that, which makes it sound like we're Chile or something, you know. No. It will be a big matter, a very heated discussion on a number of different topics here. And then we will come to a conclusion. And if they'll put together a package, if the President and the National Assembly and the various people and the committee, the big commission that's been set up with people from different parts of society, and they finally come up with something they feel is suitable, they'll put it up for a referendum next year. And we'll see if it passes, because in Panama, referenda don't always pass. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So we'll see when we get there. But we're not Chile. We're there now. Last I noticed, 21 people are dead, $1.4 billion of damages, and more to come. Breaks my heart. It's a wonderful country, but they're very different. And you're now seeing that. Most people know very little about it, but it's wonderful people. I have good Chilean friends. But they have a tough situation and a tough history. Well, all right, so this is what happens. So all I can tell you right now is that if you have something specific, you can always right now say, no, that isn't, or yeah, that is partially true, or one thing or another. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time on it here. I'm not going to go through the laundry list I was going to go through, because it is not worth it. Because as I've said many times before, if you don't want to come here and you're worried, don't come. It's not going to hurt my feelings at all. Certainly not going to affect my income at all. So you do what's best for you. Just try not to let them manipulate you in fear and tell you fear. Demand facts. Demand the backup for things if they're trying to scare you. And just be forewarned, so to speak, if you haven't noticed it already. But anyhow, God bless you, because I know it's not an easy task. The first time you go overseas, you have a lot of thoughts that probably come from the 20th century and so on. But when you get here, I think you will, as pretty much everybody who comes down does, you discover this is a pretty nice place and people are friendly. And things aren't so bad after all. So I hope you get the chance to do that. Thank you for your patience with this, and I hope that the gentleman who wrote was very kind to share some of the comments with me that led to tonight's video, understands that I'm not holding him responsible. So thank you very much again, and I look forward to seeing you soon, and we'll be talking about something a little bit more directly associated with Panama and the possibility of you being here than what I had to discuss tonight. Thanks again.